Hello, and welcome to the WWIA Podcast. We're honored to have you join us in our mission to bring honor, connection, and healing to America's combat-wounded Purple Heart heroes. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, we welcome you. If you're a returning listener, thanks for coming back. Please be sure to tell others about our podcast and leave us a review if you're enjoying what you're hearing. Most of us would agree that we live in a day and age where the pace of life is just blistering. Considering that we only have so much time and energy to give, deciding how and what we'll devote our time and energy toward is all important. In today's episode of the WWIA Podcast, WWIA Founder and CEO John McDaniel addresses this topic and provides some insight on how we can effectively bring balance to our lives through self-reflection, asking relevant questions, and by prioritizing what matters most to us. It's a timely and relevant topic we hope resonates with you. Without further ado, let's join John now.
Hi, I'm John McDaniel, founder and CEO of the Wounded Warriors in Action Foundation, and this is our podcast, Honor, Connect, Heal. Well, I was asked here to do a couple of solo bits, and so we began to sort of kick around what I might chat about. And I had already, for myself, I had written a few things on a scratch pad, which I often do. And, here in the office and in my, inner circle, especially, those that I work with every day, I talk about, plate spinning. And, it's an interesting analogy or perhaps metaphor, for life. But, you remember seeing the guys in the circus, spinning the plates, and you got like 30 plates spinning. And by the time they get done spinning 30 plates or whatever the number is, one of those plates is wobbling and getting ready to hit the deck. Well, the same thing's true in life, right? But you can't spin 30 plates. I mean, you can. If you're Superman or Superwoman or something like that, but that's just, that's a lot of plates, that's all you do is run around and spin plates. And, just a matter of time before something hits the deck and shatters. And that's what we're trying to prevent. In the military, we had this thing they taught us, as leaders, in the infantry anyway, in the special operations arena, that I grew up in. I remember this idea of this concept of span of control. It's related, so bear with me. But this idea of span of control is, one's ability to, control things, effectively, manage, control, lead, and the number 3 to 5 keeps popping up. We as humans can effectively handle 3 to 5 projects, 3 to 5 tasks. At any one given time. So, I began to think about that, like in terms of, in aggregate, the number of plates, this is just for me personally. Okay. Cause I do talk about it at work, like, hey, that's just another plate spinning exercise. And right now, guess what? We're full up on plates, unless that plate has spinning that plate has the potential for a huge return on investment or ROI. I'm probably not, spinning it. Because, there's only so many hours in a day, oh, look, there's another bright, shiny object, and everybody goes over and, wants to, fondle the bright, shiny object. Well, that's just kind of a wasted, it's wasted time where it doesn't end up being very productive. So, if we're going to spin a plate here in the office, I make sure that it's a plate that, if properly spun, has a great return on an investment. And I don't mean necessarily monetarily, right? So I think in your own life, right? This is where this is going is, within your own life, you got to be very careful and about, the plates you're spinning and where your energy goes. And so I wrote down 5 things, going back to span of control, 3 to 5. I think 5 seems really, for me, very appropriate. If I was to say, what are the plates in my life that I have to spin, that I must spin, to be successful, to be whole, to be happy, to be right with the world. What are those plates, right? Those big plates. And within those plates, these categories, there's probably subcategories with little tiny plates you get to spin, perhaps. You can just take this analogy and run with it all day long. But I think it's important that we identify in our lives the things where we're going to focus our energy and why they're important. If you can only come up with 5, plates or 5 buckets of where your energy is going to go, then, that's manageable, and so that's the way I think about it anyway. So I'm going to run these down, we'll chat about them, but, it's up to you. I think everybody's got their own plates, right? And I'm just giving you an example, a snapshot into my reality, my world where what my plates are. And then, I wouldn't expect, everybody to have the same plates. Your plates are much different, of course. But I think it's a valuable exercise because we often find ourselves running down rat holes or spinning plates that, don't have a great return on investment. I think every one of these plates, for me personally, that I'm going to tell you about, have a great return on investment. And guess what? There's a hierarchy to them. They all have to be in balance. They all have to be spun, but there's kind of I listed them like, I don't say the most important first and then down to the last, because you could argue that all day long, but it's not the point of the exercise. The point is let's define these plates, right? So for me, the first plate is faith. Okay. And then, I have a lot of faith in my life. I'm a, very, spiritual person. I'm religious. I'm a Catholic. And so I try to be a good Catholic, a practicing Catholic. Of course, I'm a sinner, like everybody else out there, pretty much. I make mistakes. I don't always do the right thing. But the beauty of my faith is, I can ask for forgiveness, and I have relied throughout my life on being on Him. Okay, to help me and my family and my friends and people I care about, the world in general, right? I mean, so faith is an important piece. Now, if you're not religious, that might take a lot of forms, but I don't want to get into that's not the point of this conversation, but I think that faith is a very important plate for me anyway to spin. When things are tough, I turn to that. When things are good, I turn to that. I spend a lot of time in introspection and prayer, and it just helps me. It centers me. It balances me. And of course, I'm teaching my children the same thing because I think that's a very important, plate to spin. So there's that. The second plate, and I wrote this down, is family and friends. I kind of lump those two together as a plate. But hey, at the end of the day, like your family, your blood kin, that's important. That's an important plate. And I know there's a lot of dysfunctional families out there. I understand, we all kind of have our own, secrets in that space, if you will. But at the end of the day, you can't change your family. That's kind of, if they're blood related to you, that's, those are the folks that brought you to the dance. You are who you are. Genetically, you cannot change that. That cannot be altered. So, I think that's super important. It's everything from, how do you communicate? And think about that for a second. Like just the idea of communicating with your family and your friends, and this idea of being kind and this idea of, doing unto others as you would have done unto yourself. Think about it, right? Many people today, are so self-absorbed and caught up in their own stuff that they just don't see it. I mentioned this on a podcast once before, I think, but, my mom had I don't know, I guess it was a placard of some sort. It was, small. And I remember it in our kitchen in Oshkosh, Wisconsin. It was just above the sink. And it said something like, thou shalt not, criticize thy neighbor until you've walked a mile, in his or her moccasin, right? So I try to remind myself of that all the time is, be very careful judge, when you're judging somebody. But understand, try to understand things from their perspective, whatever that might be. It's difficult to do, but there's a lot of hours in the day. You can really think through what you're going to say and think through how you feel about something, and again, another little tidbit here, right? There's an old adage when it comes to carpentry. I'm not a very good carpenter, but I like to fancy that I can do some of that. I have done some of that work. But in the world of carpentry, there's an adage that says, measure twice and cut once, right? We've all made that mistake of, doing a hasty measurement and cutting something and going, dang, it's too short. It's one thing that's too long, you can cut it again. But if you cut it too short, hey, sorry about your bad luck. So why do I mention that? I mention that because before you engage your mouth, okay, and words start flying out of your cake hole over something, maybe you ought to pause, all right? Think about it. Get yourself together. And, because you can't take words back. And words can be very harmful to people, right? And so just try to, understand, whether that's a friend, a family member, they might be going through something tough, or just having a bad day, but you can kill them with kindness and understanding. And so think twice, 3 times, maybe even 4 times before you open your mouth to say something, right? So, measure twice, cut once. Think 3 or 4 times and then, decide and act or say something. But just be careful with that, right? Because people's sensibilities are often at play, especially when you have, when you're talking to your friends or family. So think about that. So that's a plate, right? So faith, that's a plate. That's my number 1 plate. My number 2 plate is family and friends. I want to talk about spinning those plates, right? That means you got to spend time there, right? I'm an economist by nature only because I got a degree in economics, from the University of Wisconsin, which I was, very proud to do. So my mind thinks often, in terms of energy and flow charts and time spent on things like a pie chart. How much time am I going to spend on this? And if it's a priority, maybe I should be spending more time on that, sort of. But, these plates got to be spun, which means you got to spend time with it. And it ought to be quality time, not just, like with my family, my boys, man, I spend a lot of time with those cats. Dylan is turning 10 here in June, and Luke is 7, soon to be 8 in October. And their school year is just winding up here, 4th and 1st grade. Just can't believe it. But, it's school year's almost over. Got like 4 or 5 days of school left, But that quality time with those boys, and the rest of my extended family, and friends, when I'm with them, you got to be with them, right? Put the damn phone down, and spend quality time with them. Go do something fun, and make that time special. You have to. We're just not here on this planet very long. And so I think it's important to, spend quality time with the people that you love or know, like, and trust, that you've befriended. And so those plates, when I talk about spinning them, you got to spin them. And if you don't spin them, they hit the deck, right? And then they break. And then you got to repair them or get a new plate or, there's lots of ways of looking at that. But hopefully they don't, hopefully they don't, they don't fall and, wobble a little bit, I have strayed from my faith from time to time. And I look over and I look over at my plates and I'm like, well, that one's wobbly, and I'll go, spin the heck out of it, keep it upright. Anyway, so that's the first 2 plates. Now the 3rd plate is your work or your vocation, and you got to do that, right? You got to spend that plate. And we spend a lot of our time working, 9 to 5, 8 to 4, whatever, I work a lot. I always have. I try to, put in an honest day's work every single day, whether it is when I was wearing a uniform or, after or even before. I enjoy working, accomplishing things, and, it's important. Whatever your vocation happens to be, your chosen field of work, you're going to wake up, slug it out and, schlep it into work, and, you're going to do something, whatever that is. But, that's a plate, and you got to spin it right. And you got to do that right. You have to be successful at work. You have to interact with your peer group, your superiors, your subordinates, your peer group, everybody in the middle, right? It's important to get that proper and right. So that's a very important plate. If you think about it, the average person probably spends like 40 hours a week working. That's probably spending more time working than you do with your family, for crying out loud, right? It's ridiculous. But hey, we all have to have clothes and shoes and, cars and this kind of thing. So we have to work. And that's in a very important place. So when you're at work, focus on newsflash, do that well. Understand what your priorities are. Understand who your boss or bosses are and how to manage them. It's a crazy idea about managing your boss, but, you can do that by staying ahead of things and understanding what makes him or her tick and what's important to him. So in managing the relationships between your peers and your subordinates, is it be on time, and be a successful contributor to that team. That's very, very important. So that's a plate. Work is a plate. So right now we got 3 plates. We got our faith. This is just for me. You can pick your plates. They're up to you. All right. So my 3 plates so far, faith, family and friends, and my work. Okay. So the 4th plate here, I know it's this, hey, I don't know. You could probably talk about this in lots of ways, but I just wrote it down. Excuse me, I had a drink of coffee there. Is I put down recreation and then I put hunting and fishing, and then, I put play, and that also includes, hey, I like to paint. I'm an oil painter. I like to do master's work, in the impressionist realm, and that brings me great satisfaction. And I like that. I love to play guitar, so I do that, and I love to hunt and fish. So all those things that I love to do that make me feel good, that's a plate. And you got to define those things, and you got to do them. Because if you neglect yourself, the last plate, I'll tell you, I want to spend some more time on plate number 4, recreation, hunting, fishing, and play. I guess you could probably put that, some smart person could probably put that on a better category. But there's a lot of things going on in that space for me. Brings me peace. It's balance to my life. It's restoration. It's an investment, in me. And these are the things that I like to do, and that I like to do well. If it's something that I care about and I like to do, I spend a lot of time figuring out, and always have, how to do that very well, because many of those things are difficult to do. Like oil painting, replicating a master's work, or doing a wonderful, piece in plein air, as an example, in an impressionistic style, with oil paints. That's difficult. It's just not easy to do. Maybe it might be for some people. I don't think I'm gifted in that area. I just know that I like to do it, and I try really hard to get it right. Sometimes it comes easy. Most of the times it doesn't. I jokingly say I understand why Van Gogh cut his ear off. But in playing guitar, that's difficult. Catching a permit on a fly rod, in the Florida Keys, exceptionally difficult. chasing a trophy whitetail buck, or I say chasing, but, pursuing, harvesting a trophy northern whitetail buck with your bow. Very difficult to do. So I like to do things. I like to pursue things that are very difficult and hard to accomplish or hard to achieve. But it brings me, the process brings me a great deal of satisfaction. And I think you got to figure out what that is about you, that you like to do, and you got to invest, time in that. Okay. And that's, in my opinion, that's super important. Okay. And then the fifth plate and the last plate, I just wrote down, John. That, and you could say, well, where's John? And I'll tell you why I think 5, I call it John, is different, and I think a lot of that's like self-care. Like that's taking care of yourself. Like if you don't take care of yourself, like physically, mentally, emotionally, if you don't take care of yourself, nobody else is gonna. Here's the news flash. It's not gonna happen. So you got to do that. Like this morning, I woke up, I had a long weekend with the boys. I was in bed. I think I was in bed at like 8:30 last night. It was early because I didn't have the boys, right? So I could do that. And I did. And I went to bed and I woke up this morning at like 5:30, and I was like, wow, bing, I'm up. But it was a great night's sleep and I needed it really bad. That's a John plate. That's investing in myself, right? It's not recreating, it's not hunting, it's not fishing, I'm not painting, I'm not doing a guitar. That's just sleep, but that's restorative sleep and it's important. That's self-care. Okay. So I did that. I ate a nice meal, nice light meal. I went to bed early, and I slept great. And I loved it. I woke up and what did I do? I got my PT clothes on. And I went for a 10-mile bike ride. I did it as the sun was coming up in Apollo Beach. And I got a 10-mile route. And I put my headset on. And I just, I ride, for an hour. It takes me an hour to do 10 miles. And that's what I did. I got home. I took a shower. I got ready. And what I do? Get me to work. But self-care. And it means going to see a doctor. That means eating right. And eating right, I'll tell you what. I love to cook, right? So, but I try to eat really healthfully, healthy. I try to eat very healthy. And that takes time. Like you got to go to the grocery store. You got to pick all your fruits, vegetables, your proteins, and then you got to go home and prepare it. It takes a lot of time. It doesn't take hardly any time to go to McDonald's, right? But that's not very healthy. That doesn't mean you can't do it every now and again. Sure, everybody does that, or your favorite fast food restaurant, whatever that might be. I get it. But, you got to take care of yourself, right? So you got to go see the doctor when every annual physical, you got to, you got to take your vitamins, you got to do PT, you got to work out, you got to get a lot of sleep, those things are not recreating, but if you don't take care of yourself and you're not like ready to rock and roll that day, because you got a horrible night's sleep, because you were, worrying about this, that, or the other thing, or, restless night of sleep, you're not really taking care of yourself, right? And how can you be great at work, or how can you be great with your family or friends? How can you be great, going out hunting or doing a painting when you're super tired and just, upset with people in life in general and full of worry? You can't. So there's the news flash, right? Anyway, those are my 5 plates. Faith, number 1. Family and friends, number 2. My work, number 3. Number 4, recreating, and play. Hunting, fishing, guitar, whatever floats your boat. And then John, that's investing in yourself, self-care sort of thing. So anyway, that's, those are things I'd ask you to consider. I don't know. Hopefully that helps. As I was getting ready to do this podcast, I thought, does anybody really care about this? Maybe you don't, and that's okay. But maybe there's somebody out there that this helps. And that's the idea. Maybe there's a hero out there, or a supporter out there, or one of my friends or family members. Who knows? Somebody listening to this out there that just, that helps me. That's cool. So figure out, this is introspective. This is a hard look at you. And you got to do that. You got to turn inward first, understand yourself, invest in yourself so you can be the best person for everybody else that relies upon you or that needs you, right? So there you go. That's our podcast today. It's plate spinning. Okay. And I did it in 25 minutes. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. Appreciate your time. And thanks for all you do for our heroes. I'm out of here. Ciao.
Thank you for listening to the WWIA Podcast. To learn more about the Wounded Warriors in Action Foundation and how you can get involved, please visit our website at WWIAF.org or follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. If you'd like to comment or offer feedback about our podcast, or if you have a suggestion for a future episode, please email us at podcast@WWIAF.org. Thank you for your support and for helping us honor, connect, and heal our combat wounded Purple Heart heroes through the power of the great outdoors.